No, not yet, but it's not why you might think. Thing is that if you're one of the people asking this question, then it's likely that you don't yet have a full picture of what you're getting yourself into when you buy Star Citizen, but you definitely will by the end of this video. See, I'm going to break down the 5 most asked questions by curious gamers who want to get into the game, starting with what kind of PC do you need? What kind of game is Star Citizen? And what can you actually do, as in is it a dailyable game? And then how many bugs are there, and finally, how much does it cost? If by the end you think I did a good job and deserve it, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to let me know. Let's begin with the first one, what kind of PC you need to have, because if you don't have one good enough to play, then you probably should stay away for now. Currently, the minimum specifications for Star Citizen listed on the website requires at least 83 GB of hard drive space on an SSD or better, a DirectX 11 GPU with more than 3 GB of VRAM, a quad-core i5 2nd generation or AMD FX 8000 Series Plus, an over 10-year-old processor, 16 GB of memory, and your PC should be running on at least Windows 8.1 or better. Now at this point, if you already played Star Citizen, you're probably already chuckling to yourself because honestly, those are woefully inadequate to have any kind of playable experience. The real minimum specifications, in my view, are at least a 1080 Ti or 5700 XT from AMD. In the CPU department, I would say at least an 8th Gen i7 8700K or AMD 2700X or better, 32 GB of DDR4 3000 MHz or better. I can't emphasize enough how much fast memory actually makes a difference. You'll see a pretty big bump in performance if you have faster RAM sticks. And finally, a good NVMe drive or modern SATA SSD drive. Any less than this and you're going to suffer. Even with that though, you should expect around 15 to 25 FPS in cities running at around 1440p. Ideally, you should be running 1080p for such a setup. But nobody, and I repeat, nobody is getting a consistent 60 FPS everywhere at all times. Even the best rigs right now drop below 60 in certain situations like in Oracid. So if you're looking for the best experience right now, you're gonna need a 4090 with a 7800X3D to give you the best results. CIG are currently working to improve the performance with Vulkan integration sometime at the end of this year or beginning next year, but even with that, I wouldn't expect older hardware to perform too much better than they do right now. So if you think you can run Star Citizen and you're comfortable with the frame rates that you should expect, then it's time to get across the next hurdle. So your PC can run the game, but what kind of game is Star Citizen and can you play it daily? Star Citizen is currently in what's referred to as an alpha state, which means that not all features promised are yet in the game or are not yet fully functional. To be candid, most of the gameplay systems for Star Citizen aren't even present yet. This is mostly to do with the development studio's primary focus of resources and developers on the single-player component of Star Citizen called Squadron 42. While there are no official numbers for it, it's likely something around 80 to 90% of the roughly 700 developers of nearly 1,000 CIG team members are focused primarily on Squadron 42. And while you might have heard from some that they're planning to move some of those features over from Squadron to Star Citizen, we've been hearing that for years and have yet to see things that we've seen 4 or 5 years ago. So I wouldn't put too much stock in that promise. Still, despite that, there are still quite a few gameplay loops and things to do that you won't be able to find anywhere else in the industry all in one package. You can fly up into space from a giant city that's realized to shoot baddies and then do a bit of mining and then fly down to a planet's surface and nab some cool loot from a derelict outpost. In short, Star Citizen is trying to be the definitive open-world sci-fi space MMO for space nerds everywhere where you can go anywhere and do nearly anything. Once again, though, I must emphasize that it's still very far off from what's considered finished, and we currently only have one of over a planned 100 star systems. But it is important to also note that the detail and depth of a single star system far exceeds that of rival games like Elite Dangerous. Stanton is huge, and just a single moon has more area than that of all of Canada. So there's plenty of space for activities. Important key mechanics you should be aware of include survival mechanics, such as requiring players to occasionally consume water and food, and like other survival games, it's also possible to die and have what you're wearing looted and lost for good by other players. Ships, on the other hand, can be reclaimed using insurance paid in-game with in-game currency, so losing them can be quite a bit less painful. You might have heard of Star Citzen then being compared to Escape from Tarkov in this respect, and I think that's pretty accurate. PvP can also nearly happen anywhere, with the exception of inside space stations, major cities, and most outposts. So you should be aware that you can be killed and looted virtually anywhere, but thankfully Star Citzen has a law system complete with a prison gameplay loop to help discourage this kind of unbridled chaos. They've created lawful mechanics that automatically give player bounty hunters a mission to capture a criminal once they commit such a heinous act. And luckily it works pretty well, as going to prison isn't always the most fun activities for criminals, as you can spend upwards of 24 hours of real time in there if you decide you don't want to go into the mines to work your sentence off or try to escape, which also carries its own significant risks. Finally, since the game is still in development, database wipes are also common. This means that you may have earned a lot of stuff, but it can be reset. Usually though, players are warned and given some kind of compensation in the event of such a wipe, but it's still painful and you're gonna have to suffer through it. We're nearing a time where they're going to be doing this far less frequently, but this year in particular will likely see quite a few resets given the new tech that's coming online. So then what can you actually do, and can you play the game daily? Star Citzen currently has a variety of activities that are pretty fun to do, and I'll do my best to summarize them here as efficiently as possible. To begin, a space game wouldn't be a good space game without some really cool spaceships, and Star Citzen doesn't fall short in this section. There are currently over 151 flyable spaceships and ground vehicles, and each of them have different handling characteristics, looks, and fully explorable interiors for the bigger versions. And contrary to what you might have heard, most of them can be purchased in-game with in-game currency. This is actually the better route to go, as lower tier ships are much more easily acquired in the game. There are also a variety of different weapons and components for ships, each with their own characteristics to help alter and augment your ship's abilities. This is a great way to upgrade a ship before you actually buy a new one, and presently, components are also going through a rework, so their attributes are getting adjusted to make them a little bit more impactful. But what do you do with these spaceships? Spaceships themselves aren't gameplay, and I get you. Let's talk about spaceship combat activities. Another pivotal component of any self-respecting space game is space combat, and that's why it's one of the most polished of all the gameplay loops we have today. We currently have a relatively good flight system that's somewhere between arcade and simulation in style. It's at least complex enough to create an absolutely massive skill ceiling for better pilots. I've seen a single person in a starter take on 10 players at once. If you're looking for spaceship activities though, Star Citzen currently offers a variety of missions in bounty hunting, mercenary work, and piracy, and each of these can be done versus players or NPCs, or they can also be done in world events. At present, the mission system is pretty limited and simple. You receive a location to go to find a target and dispatch them. And as you do so, you'll gain a reputation which unlocks additional higher paying, higher risk missions. These locations can vary and be pretty interesting, sometimes in asteroid fields and other times in atmosphere, which can change up the flight characteristics of your ship with aerodynamics. And sometimes you'll also get multiple targets to deal with, making it a little bit more challenging for new players. There's also missions to take down pirate players. Unfortunately though, in most cases, these experiences can be rather frustrating, as bounty hunters aren't currently given many gameplay mechanics to help track down and restrict the movement of their targets easily. So it can be very time-consuming and inconsistent, and experiencing certainly isn't a very reliable way to make a profit, but it can be a lot of fun. On the other side of that, you've also got piracy, where you can disable a player's ship and steal their cargo and sell it for a pretty good profit. This works through a relatively recently added mechanic called soft death, where a ship can go into a disabled state and can be boarded before it explodes. This way you can loot stuff. There are some other oddball small missions for combat, but only a handful, and that's a pretty good overview of space combat. Non-combat space activities include things like mining, salvage, hauling, trading, and courier missions, as well as racing. Mining is a rather well-balanced and developed loop, and is probably the most refined next to space combat. It can be a great way to earn some money or just chill out, and it's a very active profession, unlike some other games like EVE Online. The more attention you give it, the more efficient you can be and the more profitable you can be. You can also earn quite a bit by using the materials you mine to refine at select stations. As for salvage mechanics, they're pretty similar right now to mining, but quite a bit more limited. The main activity is hull scraping, and it's basically just pointing a laser at a piece of debris or ship. This will get more love in the future, but for right now, it's a relaxing and profitable activity. Hauling and trading are another option for the non-combat player and are the bread and butter of some players for making a healthy profit. You basically go and buy something for a lower value and sell it for a higher value elsewhere. Pretty straightforward. However, unfortunately, it requires an external tool at the moment to be able to find out which commodity is the most valuable and where it needs to be sold. There's no tools in game, and this has been quite a bit of a frustrating point for a lot of people who enjoy this activity. It can be very profitable though if you decide to run some illicit cargo from some select locations, but that comes with some pretty significant risks and a high chance of being killed by a player, so beware of doing that. Courier missions, on the other hand, are kind of like that, but a bit smaller for smaller ships like starters, and can net some decent income through the reputation system as you build reputation with courier groups to deliver more boxes. It's like being a pizza delivery person. And of course, because you're going off on foot, it can also include some combat activities, depending on what kind of mission it is, so beware of that. And finally, you've got racing, and that's pretty profitable too. There are currently 8 official tracks in the game, with more that you can find on XGR Racing's website, a third-party group that organizes races in a kind of a competition style, which is becoming more and more supported by CIG. So if you think you're really skilled behind the stick, that is definitely something I recommend you check out. But spaceship activities aren't the only thing that you can do, because there's also the first-person component of Star Citzen, which is what makes the game so much more unique than a lot of other sci-fi games out there. When you're ready to step outside your spaceship, which is fully realized on the interior, you can actually do stuff on the moons, planets, space stations, and even just in space that you can find as you fly about the verse. Just like ships, there are a variety of suits and weapons and tools that you can find and buy around the verse to equip your character with. The selection is impressively diverse, with armor coming in 3 different class sizes, light, medium, and heavy, and with weapons that are also equally as diverse, with knives, pistols, SMGs, assault rifles, marksman rifles, LMGs, sniper rifles, and even anti-ship, anti-vehicle weapons like a rocket launcher and shoulder-fired railgun, which can really kick some butt in some select events. Finally, there are also a variety of tools like med pens, med guns, the multi-tool, with several attachments for different functions like the tractor beam and the cutting tool and the mining tool. These are all really important to have on person when you're playing the game, because a lot of missions have you doing both first-person activities as well as ship activities. All of these can also be looted off of NPCs and other players, or out of loot boxes and treasure chests that you find around Stanton as you explore and do missions. FPS combat activities include doing bounties and mercenary missions to take out players and NPCs depending on the mission, and the mission will tell you, so you won't be surprised that a real player is shooting back at you. Many of them are at present very similar to one another though, so fair warning that a lot of the locations are quite samey, at least especially the bunker ones. Thankfully, they've added a few new interesting locations in the form of derelict outposts around Stanton, and a few unique locations like Whistler's Crypt on Daymar. These are great locations to find some great loot, but are also pretty dangerous because players and NPCs are bountiful in these locations. But like I said, there are also space activities for FPS missions, such as a variety of lawful and unlawful player missions involving boarding ships to take out NPCs or trying to break free some fellow criminals. And some of these missions take place on really big ships, like the Reclaimer, which is a near-capital-sized salvage ship, and the 890 Jump luxury super yacht, where you'll have to take out some bad guys who have taken over the ship and rescue the owners. There's also a couple of missions that reliably pit you against other players, such as the Comray missions, which sets you against a player who's just turned off a communication array, which is what records crimes, so if they turn it off and they kill someone, it won't be recorded as a crime, that's why they do that. You'll be tasked with going and turning it back on, and you might fight them to do so. And then the Security Post Korea mission, which is activated when a pirate player attempts to hack their crime stat down to evade prison, and that can be a really fun location to fight in. It also has some pretty cool loot. Then, when someone escapes prison, you'll also get a mission to stop them and recapture them. This one can be rather fun. For non-combat FPS activities, there are quite a few things you can do, like investigation missions, which include some of the only story-based missions in the game currently. Courier missions, which involve retrieving hand-picked up boxes. There are also a couple of FPS job activities like hand mining and hand salvaging. I'll also include ground mining in this one because it's kind of the same thing where you're driving around in a ground vehicle, such as the ROC or ROC DS. Healing is also a mostly non-combat profession that you can do. You see, if either you or a player dies in a mission and goes into a down state, you can be recovered by sending out a mission to be rescued. The reward for anybody rescuing is 15,000 UEC, plus whatever the player decides to give the rescuing player. You can earn a bit more money if you think you deserve it. There's an entire org even dedicated to this called the Med Runners. Check them out if you're interested. And finally, probably the most exciting thing you can do in Star Citizen is participate in one of their special events. They've currently got around 4. They've got Jumptown, Xenothreat, Ninetales Lockdown, and the Siege of Orison. Xenothreat and Siege of Orison are primarily focused on NPC versus player and don't really involve players shooting other players, though it can happen. These special events have some connection to the universe of Star Citizen with a story. Xenothreat is a fight against some xenophobes who hate aliens and want them out of the UEE, and it involves you going through some non-combat activities where players are tasked with rearming and refueling a Javelin capital ship for defending the Stanton system, and then other players will be tasked in this mission with fighting off the Xenothreat baddies from Pyro. And it can be a lot of fun because it combines a lot of unique Star Citizen activities in a really fluid and compelling way. And then you've got the Siege of Orison, which takes place on the gas giant of Crusader and is a beautiful location to visit. It involves mostly PvE combat in FPS mode, and you're tasked with fighting off a bunch of pirates who have taken over some platforms. This deals with a series of different levels you have to go through fighting different bosses, and in the end you get some pretty cool loot. Highly recommended you check that out as well if you're interested in FPS combat, along with some light spaceship combat at the end. Jumptown and Ninetales Lockdown, on the other hand, are primarily PvP focused. For Jumptown, a lab begins selling extremely valuable contraband which can be retrieved by hand and sold for great value by players. However, it will be hotly contested, and this is where the PvP comes in. It's a great place to find both ground and air combat. Ninetales Lockdown centers, though, around a NPC faction locking down a space station somewhere inside the Stanton system. Players are tasked with taking down the NPC gang, which ramps up until you fight their capital ship, and also running medical supplies to the station that's being locked down. This can also, though, involve players who can join the criminal side to take over the station, so this can be a lot of fun when it works well. While I didn't cover every single mission then, you can see here that there's a lot of stuff for you to do. This brief overview should give you an idea of what's currently possible and what gameplay loops exist. In my opinion, it's still a rather limited experience, but is enough to keep a new player occupied for several months on end. Despite this though, I must say that the game is not quite yet consistently daily playable. So if that's what you were hoping for in the Star Citizen experience, I think you're better off waiting just a bit longer. That said, the game has a lot of replayability, especially if you're playing in a group, so I recommend you check out some player organizations, such as mine, which will be down in the description, to help you have a lot more fun in the game. So if you're capable of crossing that hurdle, the next thing you're going to want to know is how buggy Star Citizen is. If you've heard of Star Citizen being a buggy mess, I'm sorry to say it's true, at least most of the time. Star Citizen has a lot of highs and lows, especially around new patches and new tech features. Right now, for example, we're getting PES, persistence tech, which enables the servers to remember the locations of stuff everywhere until the server database is reset. This enables a lot of really important loops like ship salvage, body recovery, ship recovery, and more, but also comes with the problem of making nearly every aspect of the game just a bit more buggy than usual, in some areas a lot worse than others. So in short, some days your experience will be perfect in everything you imagined a space game ought to be, while other days you'll surely curse the day you purchased the game and maybe watch this video. If you're down though with that kind of experience and your tolerance is high, then maybe it's for you, but if not, I think you should wait just a bit longer, maybe a lot longer. And if you're able to cross that hurdle, well, it's time you pass the last hurdle. How much does it cost? Well, I'm sure you've heard a lot of Star Citizen's exorbitantly expensive spaceships. And unfortunately, it is true, there are a lot of expensive ships, but what's important to understand in context is that spaceship sales is how Star Citizen funds its project and why it's been continued to be developed for 10 years. It's a kind of damned if they do, damned if they don't kind of situation. But the good news is that you absolutely do not need to buy an expensive ship to enjoy the game. In fact, some veteran players will probably agree with me when I say that you'll probably enjoy the game more if you just buy a basic package and then grind up for the better gear and ships in the game. When you look at Star Citizen, you might tend to think that it's like other funding models where the more you pay, the more power you get out of your ship. But that's something you should really try to get your mindset out of when looking at Star Citizen ships. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you look at it, there really is no pay-to-win mechanic, despite what some people say. Certainly, some ships are better than others on paper, but if you have the skill, you can take out anything with a starter ship. That is to say, there is no surefire way to pay to win in Star Citizen. Expensive ships, again, do not equal better at PvP or giving you an unbeatable advantage. They're just more expensive because that's how the game is funded, and they're shiny. People like buying big shiny ships. But if you're really concerned with PvP and you want to fight in the meta, right now the meta is light fighters, which are really inexpensive and easy to get into in-game. You can save up for a Gladius or Arrow relatively quickly, like in just a month of playing the game or less, maybe a couple weeks. My personal recommendation then is to either get a $45 starter Aurora or Mustang, or go for the $70 Avenger Titan as a good, solid all-arounder that enables you to do pretty much anything in the game right now, aside from specialized trades like mining or salvage with a ship. And then save up in-game for the other specialized ships. Whatever package you choose though, don't forget to use a referral code to get an extra 5,000 UEC to start with. You can either use mine here on the screen or in the description of the video, or use a friend's. Honestly, I don't mind whatever you use, just don't forget to do it because it is handy. I've already got enough referrals, I don't need any more. If at this point though you're still not entirely sure about Star Citizen, the best next thing you should do is go watch some gameplay videos on Star Citizen, preferably those that have been lightly edited. I have some on my channel if you're interested. I also recommend watching some live streams, such as myself, where I stream on Twitch every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, so be sure to check me out there. Description will be down below in the video. But whatever you choose to do, I hope that this video at least helped you a little bit. And if I did, you know what to do. Hope to see you guys in the next one, and if you just bought the game, welcome to the verse, Star Citizen.